This is LING 270, Language, Technology, and Society, Module 3, Decipherment. In this lesson, we'll talk about the prerequisites necessary for decipherment. So far in our module, we've looked at a bunch of different example decipherments. And in the next couple of lessons, what I want to do is look to see what commonalities they all have and what they can tell us about what makes a successful decipherment. So we'll begin by talking about what the prerequisites of a decipherment are, namely the things that that have to be true before we even begin to start a decipherment process. So there are five topics that our textbook talks about and that we can see in each of these example decipherments. The first of which is that the artifacts that we're looking at is genuine. Secondly, that we have a sufficient quantity of text to decipher. Thirdly, that we know the writing direction. Fourthly, that we know the domain of the document. And finally, that we know what the underlying language that the writing system represents. For the first prerequisite, is it actually writing? First, this kind of might seem completely obvious, but we need to make sure that what we're looking at is actually a writing system. Just because we see a set of a series of symbols doesn't necessarily mean that it's a writing system. And if it's not a writing system, we can't decipher it. Sometimes symbols are just used for decoration. And in the early stage of the decipherment of the cuneiform, people thought that it might in fact be just decoration. So we obviously can't decipher a symbol system like that. Also, there are symbol systems which can be used as mnemonic devices. So the picture in the top right here is an example of Nashi pictograms. This isn't a kind of writing system, but it's a set of pictures which is used as a mnemonic device. So the pictures kind of generally represent a story that is to be memorized, but it's not really a writing system in the way that we've defined it. It doesn't represent language information. So a Nashi pictogram isn't something that can be deciphered. And similarly, there's the simple system called Rongo Rongo, which we talked about in the textbook, and there have been many attempts to try to decipher it with little success. But some recent work has suggested that this might not be a writing system at all, but a kind of calendar with some symbols indicating important holidays. So since it's not really representing language, we can't really do a decipherment. And as I just mentioned, cuneiform was thought to be a decoration, or even bird footprints, not even human-made at all. So before we even begin to start a decipherment, we have to make sure that what we're looking at is actually a real writing system. Secondly, we have to make sure that if we have some artifact with script on it, we have to make sure that it is a genuine artifact from a particular period in history. So we have to make sure that if the artifact is real or if it's a hoax. The Phaistos disc, which is reported to be the oldest artifact of writing in ancient Greece, might be a kind of hoax. For the reasons that the Heraklion Museum won't allow people to do experiments on it to determine whether or not this is the case. Yes, and the museum would have a very big incentive to make not have investigation that this is a hoax, because if it is believed that this is a true artifact, then it would be the oldest example of writing in Greece. They would be very well renowned for that. So it could be possible that an artifact is a hoax, and if it's a hoax, it's not really a representation of a true writing system. So we have to make sure of that as well. Another important aspect is there has to be enough text to do a decipherment. So to give an example, if many of you might be familiar with a font called Wingdings in some operating systems, where each letter is replaced with a particular symbol. So if you see a set of three symbols, like this hand and these two other symbols, and the black diamond, so you see that there are three symbols here, and if I tell you that this represents a three-letter word in English, how would you be able to decipher that? Well, it's basically impossible. There are so many three-letter words which could fit this kind of, which would make sense in this context. There is no unique solution to this problem. But the more symbols you have, the less likely it is that there are multiple possible decipherments. The more text you have, the more narrow your search space is. So there needs to be a certain amount of text for there to be a certain unique decipherment. This is a concept from information theory. And this amount of text is called the unicity. It's the amount of text which is necessary that there is only one possible decipherment for that text. So it's important that there is enough text for this to even be possible. And the more text there is, the easier a decipherment is to accomplish. And many decipherments fail that we've looked at simply because there's not enough text. So linear A and the Indus Valley script, and especially the Phaistos disk, if it's not a hoax, they're just these are scripts which don't have enough symbols that we could use to actually begin a decipherment. So the amount of text is another important prerequisite. And another important text as well is what the actual writing direction is. So if we want to decipher a writing system, we have to know where each word stands in the sequence and how they relate to each other. And as we talked about in the writing systems unit, not all writing systems are written from right or left to right, like English. Some are written from right to left, such as Arabic, and yeah, so writing direction isn't something that is constant. And other scripts can even be written vertically, and they're written from top to bottom. And there are also other scripts which are actually written in both directions in kind of a serpentine pattern. And the serpentine pattern is something that was used pretty commonly in ancient Greece. And this pattern is called the bostrophodon pattern. So there are a lot of different writing directions that writing systems have used, and oftentimes a writing system might even have multiple writing directions. So ancient Egyptian had multiple valid types of writing directions, and knowing the writing directions, of course, is very important for doing a decipherment. Now, if we're looking at a writing system that we've never seen before, how could we possibly know what the writing direction is? Well, what we can look for is, you probably know from your personal experience, is that when if you write in a language that goes from left to right, you might run out of space at the right end as you get to the end. So you can look in a text like this and find out, is the text crowded on one end or another? And that could give you a hint as to what the writing direction is. And also you can try to see which symbols are written on top of the other symbols. So the symbols written later are written on top of the symbols written before. So you can use that to find out the order in which the symbols were written. And from that, you can get an idea of how the writing direction works. For some writing systems, you can look at which direction the symbols are facing. This is something that happens in Egyptian hieroglyphics, looking at which each of the symbols in such as like the eagle in this picture here points to the beginning of where the writing system starts. So hieroglyphs, their orientation of the symbols actually tells you which direction it's being written in. So looking at the directions that the symbols point in can help you as well. So writing direction is another important aspect. And finally, the domain is something that is very important when you're making a decipherment. So by domain, what I mean is what kind of document is the artifact? What kind of purpose is the document written to accomplish? Is it, for example, a record of a business transaction? Is it something that is glorifying a king in their, at the site of their burial? Things like that. So, and knowing knowing what kind of document it is tells you what kinds of language might be used in that context. So a business document might talk about different kinds of commodities. It might talk about people's names involved in transactions. And religious documents, they will probably talk about the names of famous individuals that have survived throughout history, and talk about topics related to religion and things like that. So knowing the domain of the document can give you a good idea of what words might be in the document, and that can help your initial decipherment. Yeah, so we want to see whether the artifact is a business record, a religious artifact, or a burial inscription, for example. And the last prerequisite, a very important prerequisite, is to make sure that we know what the underlying language is. So we concluded module 1 by showing that all writing systems rely on language-specific information in some way. So every writing system has some connection to language-specific information one way or another. So that means that a correct decipherment requires that the underlying language is known. If we're going to do a decipherment, we actually have to know what language that is that the script actually represents. And if we hypothesize the wrong underlying language, the decipherment occurs very poorly. So as an example of this, when we were talking about linear B, when Ventris had assumed that the linear B represented the Etruscan language, he had a very difficult time completing the decipherment. But when he assumed it was similar to Greek, that when that happened, everything fell into place much more easily. And we see in our example decipherments that educated guesses about the underlying language were very important to begin the decipherment. And the underlying language is often, but not always, closely related to the language spoken in the area. So we found that in ancient Egyptian, that decipherment was helped by the fact that it is similar to the Coptic language spoken today, that Old Persian is similar to the Avestan language, and so on. So yeah, knowing the underlying language is very important because of how closely linked the language is to its writing system. So to summarize, there are 5 prerequisites that we need to make a decipherment. So firstly, we have to make sure that the artifact is genuine and it's not a hoax. Secondly, we have to make sure that we have enough quantity of the text. If there's not enough quantity of the text, there might not even be a unique possible decipherment. Number 3, we need to make sure we know the correct writing direction. There are multiple different writing directions that we've seen throughout history, and we've talked about the ways that that can be determined. We need to know, get an idea of the domain of the document. What kind of things could this document be talking about that could tell us what words are in the document? And finally, and very importantly, we have to make a good, educated guess about what the underlying language is, because writing systems always represent language information in some way.